look at our second piece of evidence for the resurrection. But first, let me just make this point. If you want to put it up on the screen, if you guys remember this from last week, there you go. So here is the second piece of evidence we're going to look at today, which is called the post-mortem. Everyone say post-mortem. Post-mortem. Appearances of Jesus to people. Now, what does post mean? After. And mortem has to do with death. So Jesus is allegedly appearing to a bunch of people after he died. That serves as really powerful evidence for the resurrection. But let me just make this final point before we get into it. If you want to put it up, you remember this from last week. Guys, without the resurrection of Jesus, there really is no Christianity. Okay? You with me on that? If Jesus didn't rise from the dead, there's very serious implications to that. And we're going to look at that next week. But just think about it. Christianity is built upon the foundation of the resurrection of Jesus. Yeah, his death too, but think about it. If he didn't rise from the dead and only died, would we have hope of salvation? No. So his resurrection is the foundation upon which our whole religion is built. This is how important of an issue this is. This is why we're discussing this question. Did Jesus really rise from the dead? And there's a lot of skeptics, a lot of atheists, even some religious people out there who say, no, Jesus didn't really rise from the dead. And so that's why we're doing this apologetics study. So what we're going to start with today is we're going to look at some evidence that Jesus was appearing to people after he died, which serves as really good evidence for his resurrection. By the way, we're going to start with the 4 gospel accounts. And I just want to mention this right off the bat. All 4 gospel accounts are reliable historical documents that we can trust. We can spend a whole nother study proving that point. We don't have time to get into that today, but they are reliable accounts. So let's start off with the first one. Matthew, if you want to put it up on the screen. We're going to go through these quickly, so if you're taking notes, you can just take pictures of these and then write down the points later. But let's look at what the New Testament writers say about Jesus' post-mortem appearances, okay? The Gospel of Matthew records that Jesus physically appeared to Mary Magdalene and another Mary on the 3rd morning after his crucifixion. You get that in Matthew 28, verses 9 and 10. He also records that Jesus appeared to his disciples later in person in Galilee. That's also in Matthew 28, verses 16 and 17. How about the Gospel of Mark? What does he say? Gospel of Mark records that Jesus physically appeared to Mary Magdalene on the first day of the week, which is Sunday. Mark 16, these are all Mark 16. He also says that Jesus physically appeared to 2 other unnamed people out in the countryside. And then he also said that Jesus appeared to the 11 disciples after his death. How about the Gospel of Luke? Luke records that Jesus physically appeared to 2 disciples. It mentions the name of one of them. His name was Cleopas. Everyone say Cleopas? Cleopas. Okay, say it with some zeal. Say Cleopas. Cleopas. All right. That Jesus physically appeared to 2 disciples. One of them, his name was Cleopas. And he walked with them on the road to a town called Emmaus. Then Luke tells us that Jesus appeared to the 11 disciples and others. And then Luke also tells us that Jesus walked with the disciples to a town called Bethany. But that's not all. Let's look at what else Luke writes in the book of Acts. Look at what he says. In the book of Acts, he records that Jesus presented himself alive after his suffering. This is to the disciples. By what? This is a great line. By what? Many infallible proofs. You guys know what infallible means?
Unfailable.
Yeah. Many infallible proofs being seen by them during 40 days. So Jesus is walking around for 40 days after his resurrection, appearing to his disciples. And then in verse 9, it says that he ascended to heaven in their sight. They saw it themselves. How about the Gospel of John, if you want to put that one up? John records that Jesus physically appeared to Mary, and then also to his disciples, except Thomas wasn't present. You guys remember that from a few weeks ago? And then 8 days later, he appears to the disciples, including Thomas. And then later, Jesus appeared to and spent time with the disciples in Galilee. We haven't gotten there yet, have we? John 21, the last chapter of the book. We still haven't finished the book yet. So save that for a couple weeks from now. That's chapter 21. And then let's look at one more, the Apostle Paul. In 1 Corinthians, before we put up each point, we're going to read these verses together. 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And as we read through them, I want you guys to jot down and take note of each person or group of people Jesus appears to. Okay, and then we'll put up the points on the screen as we read each one. So 1 Corinthians 15, can I get a reader? Anybody? You want to read?
Yeah.
All right. Can you start in verse 3?
Wait, 1 Corinthians where?
Chapter 15.
Okay. The resurrection of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to
Cephas. Okay, there's our first one. If you want to put that up on the screen, he appeared to Cephas. Who's Cephas? What's another name for Cephas? Peter. Okay, this is who he's talking about. All right, so he appears to Cephas, and then who else? Keep going. Anybody can say it. Anybody.
And then to the 12.
Okay, then the 12. So we have that. If you want to put that one up, then who?
After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers.
Holy smokes! Over 500 people. That's a pretty big deal. Keep that in mind. Keep going.
At the same time, most of whom were still living, though some had fallen asleep.
Okay, that's kind of like metaphorical for saying died.
Then
Okay.
he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all he appeared to me, also as to one abnormally born.
Okay, so there we go.
For I am the least.
That's actually perfect right there. Thank you. So check this out. Paul records that Jesus physically appeared to all these different people and over 500 people at once. So clearly, guys, the disciples believed that they literally saw the actually physically resurrected Jesus. By the way, regarding this account that we just read from Paul, there's a historian named Hans von Kampenhausen. Okay, pretty cool name, right? Here's what he says. This guy is a historian. Look at what he says. If you want to put that up, he says this account, speaking of what we just read, this account meets all the demands of historical reliability that could possibly be made of such a text. Now, maybe you're thinking, what? Well, here's the thing, guys. Historians, when they're trying to determine if an ancient account is reliable and that we can trust it, they have different tests, criteria that they apply to an ancient document to see if it's actually trustworthy. Did you know that? And so that's what he's talking about here. This account that we just read from Paul, it meets all the demands, all the requirements, all the tests. It passes all the tests to see if it's historically reliable. Now, what are those tests? Any idea? There's 7 tests that historians apply to ancient documents to see if they are reliable. You want to know what they are? Why? Are you curious? Yeah? Cool, sir. All right, let's look at them. Here's test number 1. The question they ask is, do we have early testimony? And what they mean by that is, with this document we're reading about, or a certain event that happened, do we have early testimony about it? People testifying to this event. Okay? So in general, like the earlier the source is, like closer in time to the actual event, the better, more reliable, more accurate it typically is. So for example, if let's say you witnessed a really big event and you write about it, let's say 10, 20, even 30 years afterward, that is usually considered a better, more reliable document than if someone wrote about it 200 years afterward. Okay, because it's closer in time to the original event. So this is the big question. Do we have, regarding the resurrection of Jesus, early testimony, people testifying early on after it happened that they saw it? Second test that they apply is this. Do we have eyewitness testimony? Remember the 3 witnesses that I told you guys about? Do we have eyewitness testimony? Okay, remember what I said last week. Eyewitnesses are some of the best evidence in proving a case. Do we have that with the resurrection? Yes. Third test they apply is this. Do we have testimony from multiple independent eyewitness sources? Not just from one person, but from multiple people. Do we have that? Yeah. See, here's the thing, guys. Multiple witnesses to the same event, they all saw the same thing, but usually they record different details. Let me give you kind of an example. Let's say right after church, we're hanging out in the parking lot and stuff, or let's say right downstairs in the cafe. You guys ever go to the cafe? Yeah? All right, so let's say we're all hanging out, and we're all kind of spread out in different parts of the cafe, and some crazy event happens, okay? Let's say someone doesn't like their coffee, so they throw it in the face of the barista, and then this fight breaks out, okay? Hopefully that doesn't happen, but let's just say that's the story. Now, Gabe is walking down the hallway when it happens, so he kind of sees it out of his peripheral, and he kind of sees a certain angle of it. But then Gabby is sitting with Maddie over here, and she sees a completely different angle. And then Savannah's sitting over here and sees another angle. You guys all witnessed the same event. And when it's time to tell the police what you saw, you're sharing different details. Now, maybe Gabby shares a detail that Savannah doesn't, because she saw it from a different angle, right? They may have some different details, but they're all saying basically the same stuff. So that's kind of the question here that historians ask. Do we have testimony from multiple independent sources? Fourth test that they apply is this. Are the eyewitnesses trustworthy? Okay, do you think that's an important factor? For sure. This has to do with people's character. Do they have a good reputation of being honest, honorable people? Or are they known to be liars? And then the fifth test is this. Do we have corroborating, in other words, other evidence to go along with it from, let's say, things like archaeology and or other writers from ancient times? Okay, this is just basically more confirmation and helping to prove a case. And then the sixth test is this. Do we have what's called enemy attestation? AKA, what's that third type of witness? Hostile witness. Okay, remember what that is? So think about it, guys. If an enemy admits certain facts that the eyewitnesses already said were true, what can you conclude? I'll ask that again. If a bunch of enemies testify to a certain fact that the eyewitnesses already said were true, what could you basically conclude about the thing? Almost certainly true. Because what do the hostile witnesses, what do they have to gain? Nothing. They only have things to lose. It's kind of like this, guys. If your parent says that you're brave, it could be true. But if your enemy says you're brave, it's almost certainly true, right? Because what do they have to gain from that? Nothing. And maybe sometimes that's even more credible. Do we have that with the resurrection? Hostile witnesses saying, yeah, that's going around that Jesus apparently rose from the dead, for sure. And then the seventh and final test, then we'll move on, is the question they ask, does the testimony contain certain events or details that are embarrassing to the authors? Generally, do people like to record and admit details about themselves that they find embarrassing? Do you guys like, if you're at school and they put over the loudspeaker some embarrassing details about you, do you guys like that? Anybody? No? So people tend to, if they're writing a biography about themselves or they're writing certain stories about themselves, they leave out a lot of the embarrassing details. If an author admits embarrassing details about themselves for everyone to read, those details are probably true. Do we have that in the Gospels? Do the Gospel writers include embarrassing details about themselves? What are some?
When Peter lied to Jesus about knowing Jesus.
Yeah. When he lied and denied Jesus 3 times, for sure, good. What's another embarrassing detail? Thomas, doubting. Good. How about, what are the disciples doing on Resurrection Sunday before Jesus appeared to them? They're hiding because they're afraid. Being cowards. Is that an embarrassing detail? For sure. So, all that to say, let's go back to our quote from Hans von Kampenhausen. Okay, he says this account that we just read about, it meets all the demands. In other words, what he's saying, guys, is we have good evidence supporting exactly what Paul said. In fact, guys, not only that, but there's a New Testament critic, a guy who criticizes the New Testament. He's an enemy of Christianity. His name is Norman Perrin, and he says this, if you want to put that quote up, he says, the more we study the tradition, talking about the resurrection of Jesus, with regard to the appearances, these post-mortem appearances, the firmer the rock begins to appear upon which they are based. In other words, what he's saying is, guys, the more we look at the evidence from ancient history, the more obvious it becomes how strong of a case we have that the resurrection actually happened. That's pretty amazing, coming from a guy who's critic of the New Testament. Agreed? So, all done. Or are there objections that skeptics make? Do you think any skeptics object to these appearances? Let's see. Oh, there you go. This is what happens when we don't have a good lighting and wall yet. All right, so there are objections that some people make. Let's look at a couple of them. There's 2 major objections. The first one is this. Some people say, well, Jesus' appearance, his appearances were only spiritual. They weren't literal or physical appearances. So do you guys remember that group I told you about last week? Their name is the Jesus Seminar. Okay? Oh man, it has the name Jesus in it, so they must be Christians. No. Okay? This group of scholars, bunch of people with their PhDs and stuff like that, they're called the Jesus Seminar. And they're basically a bunch of foolish people who think they're really smart, but are kind of dumb. Okay? And basically what they say is basically what they've done with the New Testament is ripped out the majority of the New Testament and said, here's what we're left with. This is probably actually what was in the New Testament. Like, you know, the Our Father who art in heaven prayer that Jesus gave, remember? I said that last week. They butchered that whole thing and said the only part of this prayer that Jesus actually probably said was Our Father. And that's it. It's like, okay, buddy. But basically you have this guy named John Shelby Sponge, or Spong, whatever. And he says that basically Jesus' appearance couldn't have been, he couldn't have appeared to his disciples literally in a physical body, because how can a physical person walk through walls with locked doors? I mean, that's not possible. Well, duh, unless you're God, right?
Yeah.
Jeez, come on. So they conclude Jesus' appearance, they were only spiritual. There's, by the way, we're doing a cult study right now, right? On Wednesday nights. And what other group denies the physical, literal resurrection of Jesus? The J-Dubs, Jehovah's Witnesses. They say Jesus only rose how? Spiritually, not physically. So, how would you guys respond to that?
The Bible, it says that he touches, that his disciples touch him physically, and just to make sure he's not a ghost.
Nice, very good. Here's a couple verses for you guys. Let's put up the first one. Matthew 28:9 says that the women held Jesus by the feet. Guys, you can't hold a spirit. And a spirit doesn't have physical feet to touch. Okay, so you have that problem for this theory. But then here's another one. Everyone turn to Luke chapter 24. Let's go there together. Luke chapter 24. We're going to read a few verses together. I want you guys to see if you can find all the ways that we see evidence that Jesus physically appeared to people. Luke 24. We're going to start in verse 36. Okay, you guys ready? You guys ready? All right. 24. We're going to start in verse 36, and I'm going to read through it, and I want you guys, we'll put up the points on the screen as they come up, okay? So here's really good evidence that Jesus' appearance were physical appearances, not just spiritual. So look at verse 36. It says, "Now as they said these things, Jesus himself stood in the midst of them and said to them, 'Peace to you.'" Gotta love those jump scares that Jesus gives after his resurrection, just like appears. And look, it totally scares them. Verse 37, "But they were terrified and frightened and supposed they had seen what? A ghost or a spirit." Guys, this is amazing. Because this whole objection, oh, Jesus didn't really physically appear, it was just spirit. That's what the disciples first thought. Right? They thought Jesus was just a spirit, but then he showed them, look at what he does. He shows them his physical body. Isn't it kind of funny that the disciples were the very first skeptics? You ever thought about that? The disciples were the very first skeptics. They thought it was just spiritual, not physical. But then that changed, because here's why. Look at what happens. Verse 38. "And he said to them, 'Why are you troubled? And why do doubts arise in your hearts? Behold my hands.'" In other words, look at my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. "Handle me." In other words, touch me and see, for, look at this, "a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see I have." Huh. So Jesus tells them, look, touch my body, guys. And Jesus dissolves any thought that this is just a spiritual appearance. But then this happens, verse 40. "When he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet." So there's another one. Verse 41, "But while they still did not believe for joy and marveled, he said to them, 'You have any food here?' So they gave him a piece of broiled fish and some honeycomb." I've never eaten that combo before. It doesn't sound great, but maybe in that culture that's like good. "And he took it, and what did he do?"
Ate it in their presence.
He ate it. A spirit doesn't eat physical food. Okay, so look at all these examples that we have. And then if you, this last point, if you look at verse 50, it says that Jesus lifted up his hands and blessed them. So obviously the disciples are seeing a physical body, not a spirit. Okay, you guys with me on that? Makes sense? And then here's another one. If you go, we're not going to look there right now, but John chapter 20. You guys remember we studied this a couple Sundays ago? With the appearance of Jesus to Thomas especially. Jesus showed Thomas his physical body, the nail prints in his hands, his feet, the wound in his side. So there's good evidence. This objection that, well, Jesus, he only appeared spiritually, it has none of this important thing called what? What?
Evidence.
No evidence. Let me just remind you guys, if Jesus' resurrection was only spiritual, what could the Jews in Romans do in order to disprove a resurrection? They could have taken his corpse out, but they never did. So again, good evidence that this was a physical resurrection. But here's the main one for today. Let's look at the second major objection, and this is what a lot of atheists and skeptics Here's their objection. If you want to put it, oh, there you go. This is the hallucinations theory. Look at it. Look at it. Does it trip you out? Eric's pretty mesmerized. All right, let's look at it. Here's the second major objection, guys, is the hallucinations theory. A lot of people say, well, the disciples, all these people, they were just either hallucinating or they were having visions or trances. How would you respond to that? Let's say you're at the mall this week and you get into a conversation with an atheist and you say, well, the resurrection of Jesus is really good evidence that Christianity is true. And they're like, he didn't really rise from the dead. And you say, well, the disciples, tons of eyewitnesses, and they say, well, they were all just hallucinating. What would you say? Good question. Tyler, what would you say? How would you answer that objection?
I don't know.
Okay, it's good that you're here.
Yeah.
Eric? Okay, good question. Kaylee? Really great question. David?
Nobody's ever observed hallucinations to work that way.
Okay, excellent. Good.
When you said 20, I looked at it, and the first verse that popped up was the women were clinging to him. How could that be a hallucination?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so guys, here's the question. Is it reasonable to assume that all these people were just hallucinating? What do you think? Well, let's look at this important thing called what? Evidence. What does the evidence show? Did you guys know that modern psychiatrists have actually discovered in their research that there's various laws and features that are actually required, they must be present in order for a person to hallucinate? You guys know that? Not everybody hallucinates. So I'm going to share with you 3 or 4 of some of these features that, again, this is what the professionals say. So let's look at what the professionals say to see if it's reasonable to assume the disciples hallucinated. Here's one of the things, guys. Hallucinations don't happen to everyone. They only happen to certain types of people. Here's the first one. Hallucinations usually happen to high-strung, highly imaginative, nervous people. Not nervous only now and then, because everybody gets nervous, right? Right? You guys ever get nervous? We're talking about people who are always nervous, people who are always on edge. Does that seem to fit with the description of the disciples? No. Here's another feature, if you want to put up the second one. Usually, only paranoid or schizophrenic people hallucinate. So let's compare that to what we actually have in the disciples. Here's the problem for this theory. Jesus appeared to many different types of people. Okay? His appearance were not restricted to only a group of people of a particular psychological makeup. There were a bunch of different types of people. Here's a third law, requirement for people to hallucinate. It occurs in people when there's a spirit of anticipation or hopeful expectation for the future. How does that line up with how the disciples were feeling on Resurrection Sunday? Look at this. Did the disciples have a really great anticipation and excitement or a hopeful expectation for the future? No. Rather, what do we see them doing on Resurrection Sunday? Hiding. And John tells us, John 20, for fear of the Jews. They're afraid. They have no hope for the future. They're not excited at all. They're terrified. In fact, let's look at this verse. If you want to put it up on the screen, guys, they actually had a lot of disbelief. even after they were told about the resurrection. So Mark 16, after the women see Jesus, the women go and tell the disciples, and it says, and when they heard that he was alive, the disciples hearing from the women that he was alive and had been seen by her, they what? Did not believe. Okay, they don't have hope. After that, he appeared to two of them as they walked and went into the country, and when they told it to the rest, okay, these two guys come back and tell the disciples, it says, but they did not believe them either. In fact, Luke tells us this. When the women come and told the disciples, hey, he rose from the dead, we saw him. It says, but it seemed to the disciples like they were just telling fairy tales. The disciples basically tell the women, you guys are out of your mind. Does that sound like a hopeful expectation for the future? No, not at all. We're not going to read this one, but you guys could just take a picture of it. Luke chapter 24, verses 21 through 24. It shows when Jesus is walking on the road to Emmaus, these guys, they have no hope. They're not excited. In fact, they tell Jesus, they don't know it's Jesus at first. Again, you gotta just love, Jesus totally goes incognito. Like, how did he hide himself from these guys with all these scars and stuff? He just shows up. These two guys are walking on the road. Two disciples, they're pretty bummed out, and Jesus just appears. It's like, hey guys, what's up? What are you talking about? And they're like, what do you mean, what are we talking about? Are you like a stranger here? Everyone in Jerusalem knows this massive event that just happened, and Jesus says, what event? And they start telling him about Jesus dying, and then they say, but we were hoping. Notice the past tense. They don't have hope now. We were hoping that he was the Messiah. And then, some lady said that he rose, but we didn't see him. Does that sound very hopeful for the future? Not at all. So here's an important point for today, guys. Really important point. The disciples were the very first skeptics of the resurrection. Also, it's unreasonable to believe that one of you guys mentioned this, over 500 people at one time all had the same hallucination of seeing Jesus alive in the flesh. Here's why it's unreasonable. Because another requirement that modern psychiatrists have found, another requirement in order for people to hallucinate, if you want to put that one up on the screen, guys, hallucinations are experienced by individuals, not by whole groups of people. That's what the professionals say. Hallucinations are experienced by individual people, not by whole groups of people. It's similar to dreams. Okay? You guys ever have dreams? It'd be like if your friend came up to you at school tomorrow and they're like, dude, man, wasn't that an amazing dream we had last night? What would you think? Your friend is either nuts or they're on LSD. Okay? Hopefully neither. But like, it's a drug that makes you see really weird, crazy stuff. Don't do drugs, kids. So here's the thing. That's what the professionals say. This is what the facts are. Hallucinations are experienced by individuals, not whole groups of people. Plus, if you want to go to the next slide, here's an important point, guys. The appearances of Jesus to people, they happened under different conditions. They were spread out over different times. And Jesus appeared to all different kinds of people, which makes it totally unreasonable to assume it was just a hallucination. Were the disciples insane people? No. We have good evidence to show they were sane. They were intelligent. They weren't prone to hallucinations. They had reputations of being honest men with integrity. Remember, guys, at first they didn't want to believe their own senses. They disbelieved. When did they finally believe Jesus rose from the dead?
When they touched you.
It was only after they were given an overwhelming amount of proof that they finally believed. So, guys, our logical conclusion here then the inference to the best explanation is that these people saw exactly what they recorded in these accounts. The physically resurrected Jesus. And I'll close with this. I want you to think of the eyewitness versus people in court today. All right? The disciples were eyewitnesses of the resurrected Christ. Skeptics should be much quicker to believe them rather than to discount what they said. Think about it like this. If you got to go sit in on a court case this week, and there's a huge event that happened, and there's over 500 people that they go and take the stand at different times, over 500 people that testify as eyewitnesses to this big event. And these people are intelligent, sane people. They are known, they have a reputation for having good character. They're noble people. They're not liars. They have reputations for being honest and having integrity. Would anyone in their right mind just throw out every one of those 500 testimonies and just assume they're all liars? What do you think? 500 witnesses to an event, and these people have proven character. No, of course not. No one in their right mind would do that. Rather, those witnesses would be believed because of their proven character and because they were eyewitnesses to a major historical event. But when it comes to the resurrection of Jesus, skeptics are so quick to just dismiss it as, nah, and they chalk it up to hallucinations, which totally goes against the facts of what the professionals say are required for hallucinations. So guys, the real problem isn't with us. The real problem is not that we don't have enough evidence for a resurrection. The problem is that we have a lot of good evidence, and the skeptics just don't want to follow the evidence where it leads. They have a bias, an illogical bias against anything supernatural, anything miraculous. Because in their worldview, God can't exist. And the natural and the physical is all that there is. So anything that can't be explained by the physical, we got to chalk it up to other stuff. So that's kind of where we finish, guys. Our conclusion for today is the post-mortem appearances, when you really dig into it and examine the evidence, they are really good, solid evidence for the physically resurrected Jesus. Cool? Any questions? Okay, let's do this. Let's break up into small groups.